What happens when a woman who once captured the world's imagination as a royal suddenly finds herself at the mercy of Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight? Imagine believing that the universe owes you recognition, only to discover that the very industry you tried to charm has rejected you. That is exactly what happened to Meghan Markle, and it all came crashing down when the nominations for the 31st Critics' Choice Awards were announced. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The shock came instantly. The moment she scrolled through the list, or rather, had someone scroll for her, the absence of "With Love," Meghan was impossible to ignore. Not a single nod. No acknowledgement of her work, her vision, or the countless hours invested in bringing her idea to life. And in that instant, a storm began to brew. Not just in Hollywood, but behind closed doors, in private homes, boardrooms, and even, indirectly, the palace corridors where whispers of her name never truly faded. But why would anyone expect that a show about Meghan Markle would sweep the awards? After all, the former Duchess had the story, the brand, the access, and arguably one of the most recognizable names in the world. The show was billed as a celebration of love, celebrity culture, and personal reinvention. Netflix heavily promoted it. Critics were tipped off, social media was abuzz, and the general public seemed primed to receive it. Yet, in a move that stunned her team and those closest to her, the Critics' Choice voters did something that seemed almost unthinkable. They ignored it entirely. Some might call this oversight. Others, a political statement. And yet, for Meghan, it felt like betrayal. Because at this point in her life, the stakes were enormous. This wasn't merely a snub. It was validation denied at the very moment she needed it most. She had poured energy, identity, and ambition into this project. The rejection cut deeper than any headline, tweet, or critics' review ever could. Behind the glitz and glamour, the announcement revealed the reality that Hollywood still moves on its own terms, and even a royal-turned-media personality isn't immune. Think about it. How often do we see someone ascend to global fame only to find that the gates of recognition remain firmly closed? And in this case, the timing couldn't have been worse. Awards season is not just a ceremony. It is a proving ground, a display of influence, a test of whether the world truly acknowledges your worth. And for Meghan, the world's verdict was clear. As you watch this unfold, consider the stakes beyond the obvious. The Critics' Choice Awards are more than just a glittering night with statues and speeches. They shape careers, attract lucrative deals, and open doors that are otherwise bolted shut. A nomination can transform a television show from a fleeting curiosity into a cultural touchstone. A snub? It can subtly, yet irrevocably, redirect a celebrity's trajectory. In this context, the absence of "With Love," Meghan was not just a slight. It was a seismic event with far-reaching consequences. Inside Meghan's inner circle, the reaction was immediate. Phone calls flew back and forth between PR strategists, Netflix executives, and her personal advisors. Some were calm, rational, and analytical, attempting to dissect why this happened. Others were panicked, worried that public perception would spiral out of control. And then there was Meghan herself. Reports suggest that her initial reaction wasn't anger, at least not in the traditional sense. It was disbelief. How could a show she believed embodied so much of her essence be overlooked entirely? The emotional weight of that moment is something few can truly grasp unless you've experienced the crushing feeling of expectation colliding with rejection. It wasn't just about the show. It was about identity. Meghan's life had been a series of carefully curated reinventions, from actress to royal, then to activist, public figure, and now a content creator with a global platform. With Love, Meghan was meant to be another chapter in that story, a testament to her influence, a claim to legitimacy in Hollywood, and a statement that she could shape culture on her own terms. And yet, the snub called all of that into question. Let's pause for a moment and consider the bigger picture. Hollywood, as glittering and glamorous as it seems, operates on a complex network of relationships, influence, and politics. Awards are rarely purely merit-based. They are about positioning, alliances, and timing. Meghan, despite her fame and pedigree, found herself outside the inner circles that often determine these outcomes. She had the public's attention, but she lacked the subtle endorsements that sway voters behind closed doors. And the consequences were immediate and intense. But the story doesn't stop there. The snub triggered a series of events that no one anticipated. According to insider reports, it set off a chain reaction. Netflix executives scrambling to protect the project, PR teams drafting crisis statements, Hollywood insiders whispering about her next moves, and, surprisingly, Prince Harry himself weighing in from afar. His reaction was neither predictable nor ordinary. In private, he reportedly expressed a mixture of sympathy, frustration, and bewilderment, underscoring the tension between Meghan's public persona and the real-life pressure she faces. Meanwhile, industry chatter was relentless. Critics and producers began dissecting with love Meghan not just for its content, but for its positioning, timing, and perceived cultural impact. Some argued that the show was simply not strong enough to warrant a nomination. Others suggested that her royal past created a kind of celebrity immunity backlash, where voters consciously resisted acknowledging her work because it carried too much pre-existing fame. Regardless of the reason, the effect was unmistakable. Meghan Markle, at this moment, felt the sting of exclusion from the very circle she had hoped to impress. And then there was the public. Social media erupted as fans, critics, and casual observers weighed in. Some celebrated the snub, framing it as a deserved comeuppance. Others expressed outrage on her behalf, seeing it as an injustice or a personal attack. The result was a swirling maelstrom of opinions, memes, and hashtags that amplified the drama far beyond the walls of any awards ceremony. But as the online storm raged, the private fallout was even more intense. What Meghan did next, and the decisions she made in the hours immediately following the announcement, would change the trajectory of her career, and perhaps even her public image, forever. This is where the story truly begins. The Critics' Choice Awards were not merely a missed opportunity. They were a catalyst for conflict, strategy, and revelation. They set the stage for drama that extended far beyond Hollywood, reaching the palace corridors, the executive suites of Netflix, and the living rooms of millions around the world. And while the snub itself might seem like a single moment, it is in fact the opening act in a much larger saga of ambition, perception, and reinvention. By the end of this video, you will not only understand what happened with Love, Meghan at the 31st Critics' Choice Awards, but also why the snub matters on a personal, professional, and even geopolitical level. You will hear the untold details of Meghan's private reactions, the decisions she made that no one else saw coming, and the ripple effects that continue to shape her path today. So buckle up, because this is more than a story about a television show. It is a story about expectation, rejection, power, and the human desire to be recognized for our work. It is a story about Meghan Markle, a woman who has navigated the impossible and yet faces challenges that even the most seasoned celebrities would struggle to endure. And it begins with a single moment. The announcement that she, despite everything, was not nominated. The room was tense, electric, and almost suffocating with anticipation. Phones buzzed incessantly. Laptops hummed like nervous insects. And in the center of it all sat Meghan Markle, the former Duchess of Sussex, her gaze locked on a screen that could either crown her efforts or shatter them completely. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, months, even. The 31st Critics' Choice Awards nominations. And yet, despite every ounce of planning, lobbying, and carefully curated buzz, nothing could have prepared her for what came next. Imagine seeing a list of names, faces, and shows that should have been her world, her moment, her triumph, only to realize that she was invisible. Not a single mention of With Love, Meghan. The omission was so stark it felt deliberate, though she knew deep down it probably wasn't. Awards are never fair. They are strategic, political, and often cruel. But still, the emotional blow was devastating. For a woman who had spent years under the scrutiny of the world's most judgmental public, this felt like a betrayal of a different kind. Not by tabloids, not by paparazzi, not by critics who had dissected her every word and gesture, but by the very institution she had hoped would validate her transformation into a serious creative force. She had poured energy into this project. Netflix had poured millions. And yet, here she was, left off the list entirely. Is this a mistake? She reportedly asked, her voice taut but calm, betraying a simmering tension. Her team checked and rechecked. Every device, every press release, every press agent's confirmation. There was no error. The list was official, final. The snub was real. This wasn't just about pride. It was about identity. With Love, Meghan wasn't merely a television show. It was a statement, a declaration that she had agency, creativity, and influence beyond the royal narrative that had defined her life for so long. It was a chance to assert control over her own story, to show the world that she could not only survive in Hollywood but thrive, innovate, and lead. And now, all of that felt like it had been rendered invisible. As Meghan processed the news, the room around her began to spin. Her PR team whispered urgently, trying to craft a response. Netflix executives exchanged worried glances, calculating how to contain any fallout. Friends and confidants texted and called, offering support, advice, and sometimes just empty words to fill the silence. But Meghan, inwardly, was grappling with a complex mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a peculiar sense of betrayal. Some of the most dramatic reactions, of course, happened behind closed doors. Sources suggest that she went through a rapid cycle of emotions. First shock, then rationalization, then a slow-burning anger that was less about the awards themselves and more about the principle. How could a project she had invested herself in so deeply be overlooked by the very people who were supposed to understand its value? How could she, a woman who had navigated global attention, media scrutiny, and the intense pressures of public life, be rendered irrelevant in an industry she had worked so hard to enter? And yet, there was no time to dwell. The world was already watching. News of the snub leaked almost immediately, and social media erupted into a frenzy. Memes, tweets, and comments flew at light speed, some mocking, some sympathetic, some utterly bewildered by the entire situation. Meghan's team scrambled to control the narrative, releasing carefully worded statements about honored nominees and grateful for the opportunity to share stories of love and inspiration. But even as they typed, deleted, and rewrote, the sting of rejection lingered. This moment also laid bare the unforgiving reality of Hollywood's awards culture. The Critics' Choice Awards, like many in the industry, are less about merit and more about influence, alliances, and timing. Voting members are swayed by strategic campaigning, insider relationships, and long-term considerations that few outside the inner circle ever see. In other words, fame and talent alone were not enough. Meghan's name, her royal past, her global recognition, even her team's carefully executed marketing campaigns, could not guarantee her recognition. And yet, there was a deeper irony here. Hollywood, an industry obsessed with celebrity, was effectively telling her, "You are famous, but you do not belong." Not yet. The rejection carried an almost personal weight, as though the gates of this elite circle had slammed shut at the precise moment she reached for the handle. Some insiders suggest that the snub was compounded by industry politics. Competitors, other producers, and even some critics reportedly viewed with Love, Meghan as a vanity project, a show driven more by the star's personal brand than by genuine storytelling. Others allegedly feared that acknowledging Meghan's work would be seen as pandering, and they resisted, consciously or unconsciously, the idea of conferring legitimacy on someone whose fame had been largely inherited from her royal identity. And here lies the first major emotional spike. Meghan's private awareness that no matter how much effort she poured into the project, external perceptions could render it meaningless. In that sense, the snub was not just a professional disappointment. It was an existential one. For a woman who had spent decades constructing her public image, the message was unambiguous. Recognition is conditional, and even the most powerful names can be excluded. The tension in the room was palpable. Netflix executives debated whether to intervene, whether to lobby for recognition, or simply let the results stand. Some argued that a counter-narrative could be spun, emphasizing audience engagement, critical praise, or social media buzz. Others cautioned against overreaction, warning that public displays of disappointment could backfire, painting Meghan as petulant or entitled. But behind all the discussion was a shared understanding. This was bigger than a single awards ceremony. It was a test of perception, influence, and resilience. And then came the reactions from those closest to Meghan. Friends, advisors, and confidants reportedly tried to offer perspective, reminding her of her achievements, her cultural influence, and the fact that one omission did not define her worth. But in private, Meghan reportedly questioned everything. She considered the sacrifices, the risks, the emotional labor invested in her public and creative endeavors. She thought about the moments she had braved media storms, palace scrutiny, and global judgment. And now, this, the Critics' Choice snub, felt like a direct challenge to the legitimacy of her efforts. It's important to understand that this was not merely a career setback. It was a flashpoint for multiple intersecting pressures: public scrutiny, internal expectations, industry politics, and personal ambition. The combination of these factors created a storm, one that could not easily be contained by press statements or controlled messaging. For Meghan, this was a moment of truth. How would she respond when recognition was denied and the world was watching? The private fallout reportedly escalated quickly. Phone calls flew between agents, advisors, and executives. Texts pinged relentlessly. Emails were drafted and discarded. And in the eye of it all, Meghan considered her options: retreat, retaliate, or pivot. Each choice carried risks. Retreat could be seen as weakness, retaliation could be seen as arrogance, and pivoting could require untested strategies that might or might not work. The emotional stakes were enormous. Meanwhile, the public reaction added another layer of complexity. Social media users speculated, mocked, and sympathized in equal measure. Memes circulated depicting Meghan reacting in exaggerated ways, while opinion pieces debated whether the snub was fair or politically motivated. In an age where perception often matters more than reality, Meghan's personal disappointment became a public spectacle in real time. Yet, amid the chaos, there was a glimmer of control. Meghan's team began outlining potential next steps: interviews, public appearances, strategic announcements, and even private negotiations with Netflix to ensure the show's longevity. The narrative was not lost entirely. It could be reclaimed, but only with careful orchestration. The stakes, however, were now higher than ever. Every move, every word, every appearance would be scrutinized. And so the scene was set, a high-stakes drama unfolding across multiple fronts. A former royal confronting Hollywood politics. A television project caught in the crossfire of perception, ambition, and influence. A global audience watching, commenting, and judging. And at the center of it all, Meghan Markle, processing a snub that felt both deeply personal and professionally significant. From the outset, the show was framed as a celebration of love in its many forms. Each episode spotlighted stories of connection, romance, and personal transformation, often weaving in celebrity appearances and curated commentary from high-profile personalities. The production team promised a polished, cinematic experience, one that merged the sophistication of Netflix's brand with Meghan's own personal sensibilities, her advocacy work, her voice on empowerment, and her understanding of the global audience she had cultivated over years. For Meghan, this was personal. Every detail, from the color palette to the selection of interviewees, had been meticulously considered. There were countless late nights spent reviewing scripts, coordinating shoots, and weighing every visual and narrative decision. According to insiders, she treated the project not as a vanity exercise, but as a serious professional undertaking, a way to assert agency over her own narrative after years of being defined by titles, institutions, and the media. And yet, despite all this effort, the show's reception was complicated. Critics were divided. Some praised the production value, the aesthetic, and Meghan's ability to create a platform that highlighted positive human stories. Others dismissed it as a calculated attempt to capitalize on her celebrity status, questioning whether the storytelling itself was substantive enough to merit recognition alongside more established shows with stronger critical pedigrees. This dichotomy was exactly what made the Critics' Choice snub sting so much. Meghan had envisioned a series that would bridge the gap between celebrity appeal and meaningful content. She believed in the show's vision, and she believed in her ability to deliver it. But the very audience she sought to impress, the industry insiders whose votes would determine its success, saw something different. For them, the spectacle of Meghan Markle was inseparable from the content of the show itself. And in that equation, the show's merit became inseparable from Meghan's persona. An equation that ultimately worked against her. Production challenges didn't help. Sources suggest that some episodes experienced delays due to scheduling conflicts with celebrity guests, location issues, and last-minute creative adjustments. These hiccups, while minor in isolation, compounded the perception that the show was inconsistent. Industry insiders reportedly debated whether such issues were symptomatic of a lack of preparation, or whether they reflected the realities of coordinating a show around a high-profile figure with global commitments. Either way, these discussions added to the skepticism around the show's worthiness for an award. The show also faced a unique hurdle: expectations. Because Meghan Markle is a globally recognized figure, audiences and critics alike approached with love, Meghan with heightened anticipation. This expectation created an almost impossible standard. Anything less than flawless execution, groundbreaking content, or revolutionary storytelling was magnified, scrutinized, and, in some cases, harshly judged. In other words, Meghan's fame became both a platform and a burden. A paradox that complicated how her work was evaluated. And then there was the cultural context. Hollywood is notoriously fickle, especially when it comes to celebrity-led projects. Viewers and voters are drawn to novelty, but they are also wary of entitlement. A show that is perceived as leveraging fame over substance risks being dismissed, even if its production quality rivals the best in the industry. For with Love, Meghan, this meant that every stylistic choice, narrative arc, and marketing decision was being dissected not just as a creative endeavor, but as a reflection of Meghan herself. The scrutiny was relentless, and the pressure to meet both public and critical expectations was immense. Despite these challenges, the show did have notable strengths. It featured compelling personal stories, visually stunning segments, and moments of genuine emotional resonance. For viewers who connected with its themes, it offered inspiration, entertainment, and insight into the human experience. Yet these strengths were overshadowed by the persistent narrative that Meghan's celebrity status, rather than the show's merits, drove attention. For the Critics' Choice voters, this perception may have been the deciding factor in the ultimate snub. Meghan, however, was convinced of the show's value. In private meetings with her production team, she expressed frustration that merit alone wasn't enough to guarantee recognition. She argued passionately about the storytelling, the social impact, and the aesthetic innovation. She pointed to positive reviews, audience engagement metrics, and glowing social media reactions as evidence that the show deserved critical acknowledgement. But in the end, the Critics' Choice Awards operate on a complex system of influence, reputation, and politics that can overshadow measurable accomplishments. Here's where things take a more dramatic turn. According to insiders, Meghan's reaction to the initial wave of critical skepticism was measured, but internally, she felt an acute sense of injustice. This wasn't just about losing an award. It was about being denied validation for a project she had nurtured from concept to completion. In her mind, the snub was a reflection not of the show's quality, but of the industry's unwillingness to accept her as a serious creative force. This emotional intensity would later influence her decisions, her public statements, and even her negotiations with Netflix. It's also worth noting the contrast between public reception and industry response. Audience engagement for With Love, Meghan was reportedly strong, with certain episodes generating viral moments and widespread social media discussion. Yet in Hollywood, the distinction between popularity and prestige can be stark. Voters often prioritize originality, artistic integrity, and insider credibility over mass appeal. Meghan's show, designed to appeal broadly and emotionally, may have unintentionally positioned itself outside the conventional prestige hierarchy. And then there's the human element. Production teams, executives, and collaborators all bring their own perceptions and biases. Some reportedly questioned Meghan's creative choices, while others admired her vision but doubted its resonance with the voting members. These behind-the-scenes dynamics created an invisible tension, a subtle yet pervasive influence that shaped how the show was ultimately evaluated. For Meghan, the realization that subjective judgments could outweigh objective effort was both frustrating and enlightening. In the midst of all this, the show's marketing strategy played a role as well. Netflix had invested heavily in promoting the series, emphasizing Meghan's involvement and highlighting its unique approach to storytelling. Yet some insiders believe that the promotional campaign, by centering so heavily on Meghan herself, may have backfired. Instead of positioning the series as a standout creative achievement, it risked being perceived as a vehicle for personal branding, a critical distinction in awards politics. Despite the skepticism, Meghan reportedly remained steadfast in her belief that the show had value. She viewed it as more than just entertainment. It was an extension of her voice, a platform for stories that might otherwise go unheard, and a demonstration of her ability to navigate and influence culture beyond traditional royal or celebrity avenues. In her eyes, denying the show recognition was denying her agency, creativity, and the legitimacy of her work. And yet, even as she clung to this belief, the gap between expectation and reality widened. The Critics' Choice Awards nomination list was final, public, and unyielding. The absence of With Love, Meghan was not an oversight. It was a statement, however unintended. It communicated a message about Hollywood's priorities, the subtle politics of influence, and the challenges of transforming global fame into critical acclaim. This moment also exposed the delicate balance between personal ambition and public perception. Meghan's show was an opportunity to redefine herself, but the snub underscored the fragility of recognition in an industry governed as much by perception as by substance. It revealed a painful truth. Success is not only about talent, effort, or intention, but also about timing, politics, and the often unseen dynamics that shape influence. And as Meghan processed the snub, the implications began to ripple outward. Relationships with collaborators, executives, and advisors were tested. Conversations about future projects, contracts, and strategic positioning became urgent. The emotional weight of the snub intersected with practical considerations about career trajectory, public image, and long-term goals. In other words, what seemed like a single moment of disappointment was actually a catalyst for a much larger, ongoing drama. So, while With Love, Meghan may have been overlooked by the Critics' Choice voters, its significance cannot be measured purely by awards or accolades. It became a mirror reflecting the challenges Meghan faced in balancing celebrity, creativity, and influence. It became a touchstone for understanding the broader dynamics of recognition, perception, and ambition in Hollywood. And it set the stage for the next wave of reactions, strategies, and revelations that would define her professional and personal journey in the months to come. The Critics' Choice Awards snub didn't just hit Meghan Markle. It sent a shockwave straight through Netflix, the platform that had invested heavily in With Love, Meghan. Behind the camera, behind the boardroom doors, a storm of panic, confusion, and urgent strategizing was unfolding. While the public saw only headlines, tweets, and social media commentary, the reality behind the scenes was far more intense, and far more revealing about the stakes involved when a global celebrity meets Hollywood politics. It began in the executive suites. Senior Netflix executives were reportedly gathered in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Los Angeles, screens flickering with social media feeds, press reactions, and snippets from industry commentary. Their faces were a mixture of concern and disbelief. How could a project that had been so heavily promoted, with such a high-profile star at the helm, be ignored by the Critics' Choice voters? The question wasn't just rhetorical. It demanded answers, and no one had them immediately. There were a few theories being thrown around, each more complicated than the last. One executive suggested that the show's content, while polished, may have been perceived as too personal or too celebrity-driven to earn genuine critical recognition. Another speculated that the voters were reacting unconsciously against Meghan's royal background, a bias that could overshadow merit. And yet another considered the possibility that the show's marketing campaign, which emphasized her involvement heavily, had unintentionally backfired, creating a perception of self-promotion over substance. In the middle of all this, internal tensions grew. The executives recognized that With Love, Meghan wasn't just a show. It was an investment, a bet on star power and cultural influence. Losing a nomination was more than a reputational issue. It was a financial one. Award recognition often drives viewership, subscriber engagement, and future project negotiations. Without it, The show risked being viewed as less impactful, less relevant, and, most importantly, less profitable. To make matters worse, the PR and marketing teams were in overdrive. Every second after the snub, they were assessing damage, crafting statements, and preparing for inevitable media questions. "We need a strategy, and we need it fast," one insider recalls an executive saying. "This isn't just about the award, it's about perception. If we don't control this narrative, the story controls itself, and that could be disastrous for the brand." The internal discussions revealed a fascinating dynamic. On one hand, Netflix had backed Meghan, leveraging her fame to attract attention and subscribers. On the other hand, the very nature of celebrity-driven projects in Hollywood created an environment where critical validation was never guaranteed. Executives were now faced with a dilemma: how to support a globally recognized figure whose ambitions had collided with the harsh realities of awards politics. The balance between protecting the platform's interests and managing the star's expectations became precarious. Sources suggest that the executives considered several immediate responses. One option was to publicly highlight audience engagement metrics, emphasizing that despite the snub, the show had generated significant buzz, high viewership numbers, and social media traction. Another option was to engage privately with award voters, lobbying subtly for reconsideration or future acknowledgement. A third, riskier option involved leveraging the narrative that Meghan's contributions to the project were undervalued, creating a subtle counter-narrative that could generate sympathy and press attention. As these discussions unfolded, the emotional weight of the situation was palpable. Some executives reportedly expressed frustration that the snub might overshadow months of careful planning, production, and marketing. Others worried that Meghan herself would react publicly in ways that could complicate the platform's broader strategy. The tension was not merely professional, it was personal. After all, relationships with high-profile stars are delicate, and missteps can have lasting consequences for both career trajectories and corporate reputations. One particularly tense moment reportedly involved a discussion about how much leeway Meghan should be given in responding to the snub. Should she address it publicly? Should the platform release a statement? Should they simply remain silent and hope the story fades? Each choice carried risk. Public acknowledgement could invite criticism, while silence might be interpreted as abandonment. Behind the polished image of Hollywood, these were not trivial concerns. They were strategic, high-stakes decisions that could shape both the show's future and Meghan's relationship with Netflix. Meanwhile, social media chatter escalated. Memes, tweets, and viral posts highlighted the omission in ways that executives could neither ignore nor control. Platforms buzzed with speculation. Was the snub politically motivated, a subtle industry rejection, or simply an oversight? Every mention amplified the stakes, turning a single event into a narrative that dominated entertainment discourse. Netflix executives had to think fast, balancing crisis management with long-term strategy. Every decision in these early hours had the potential to ripple outward, influencing not just the perception of the show, but also the credibility of the platform and the star herself. In the middle of the chaos, an interesting revelation emerged. Some executives privately admitted that while they had fully supported Meghan, they underestimated the emotional intensity with which she would react to professional setbacks. For a woman who had navigated the pressures of royal life, global scrutiny, and media invasion, the snub struck at a very personal level. She was no stranger to public judgment, but this was different. It was an evaluation of her creative work, her vision, and, by extension, her identity outside of the royal narrative. The executives realized they needed a new approach, one that combined empathy with strategic foresight. They couldn't simply manage the PR. They had to anticipate her next moves, understand her emotional state, and prepare for every potential scenario. According to sources, there were debates late into the night about whether to schedule a personal meeting with Meghan, offer reassurance, or let her process the disappointment privately. The stakes were so high that even a small misstep could escalate into a public relations disaster. And yet, amid the panic, a more subtle dynamic emerged. While Netflix had invested in Meghan's brand, they were also acutely aware that the platform's reputation was at stake. They could not afford to appear overly defensive or reactionary. If the narrative framed the snub as an institutional oversight, they risked seeming ineffective. If they defended her too aggressively, they risked alienating industry insiders and voters. The tension was a delicate dance, and executives were walking a fine line between support and strategy. The situation became even more complicated when whispers emerged about the internal debates at Critics' Choice. Some Netflix insiders reportedly reached out discreetly to gauge the reasoning behind the snub, hoping to understand whether it was procedural, political, or personal. The answers were inconclusive, but the lack of clarity only intensified the anxiety. Without transparency, every assumption could be dangerous, every rumor a potential public relations hazard. And then there was the question of audience perception. Executives recognized that public reaction could not be underestimated. Fans loyal to Meghan were vocal, passionate, and unafraid to challenge perceived injustices. Meanwhile, casual viewers and critics might interpret the snub as an indictment of the show's quality or relevance. The executives had to consider all of these perspectives simultaneously, ensuring that any response would mitigate damage while preserving the integrity of both the platform and the star. In the midst of this orchestrated chaos, Meghan herself reportedly began contemplating her next move. According to insiders, she was not one to accept setbacks quietly. She considered various strategies, from private discussions with executives to public statements that could subtly shift the narrative in her favor. Every action had consequences, and she understood that the fallout would extend far beyond a single awards ceremony. What made the situation even more volatile was the timing. Awards season is an intense, compressed period where momentum matters more than anything else. One snub could alter perceptions, affect future nominations, and influence the decisions of producers, collaborators, and platforms. Netflix executives understood that if they didn't manage the situation carefully, the ripple effects could compromise not only with Love, Meghan, but also other projects in development, partnerships in negotiation, and even long-term strategic plans. Ultimately, the executives realized that this was more than a problem of recognition. It was a problem of perception, influence, and control. The Critics' Choice snub had exposed vulnerabilities in the way Hollywood evaluates celebrity-driven projects, and it had forced Netflix to navigate uncharted waters. They had to balance empathy for a global star, strategic planning for a major platform, and crisis management in the public eye, all simultaneously. And then, according to insiders, an unexpected suggestion changed the tenor of the meeting. One executive, quietly, proposed a bold move. They could leverage the controversy, subtly framing Meghan's exclusion as an oversight and positioning the show as a cultural conversation starter. It was risky, unconventional, and unprecedented, but it had the potential to shift the narrative, generate publicity, and turn a perceived failure into an opportunity. But before any decision could be made, there was a startling realization. Meghan herself might act in ways that were completely unpredictable. Her history of responding assertively to perceived slights, whether in public statements, interviews, or strategic moves, meant that Netflix executives were no longer merely managing the situation. They were anticipating a potentially explosive response. The stakes had escalated from professional concern to high-wire management of a celebrity, a brand, and a public narrative all at once. And in that charged, high-stakes environment, the room was filled with one unspoken truth. The Critics' Choice snub was just the beginning. What came next, the private decisions, the strategic moves, and Meghan's personal reaction, would set off a chain reaction that no one, not even the executives themselves, could fully predict. And that chain reaction would transform a single moment of disappointment into a drama that would ripple across Hollywood, media, and public discourse, reshaping perceptions of Meghan Markle and her creative ambitions in ways few had anticipated. While the world buzzed with speculation, memes, and opinion pieces, the real drama was unfolding behind closed doors. Meghan Markle, the woman at the center of the Critics' Choice Award snub, was not the type to sit quietly and let a perceived injustice slide. Her reaction was intense, measured in moments, yet searing in its emotional impact. A complex mix of disbelief, anger, and strategic calculation that would soon ripple far beyond her immediate circle. The initial moment of shock reportedly left her stunned. Meghan, like anyone invested deeply in a project, had imagined this very outcome. The moment of validation when her hard work would be recognized by her peers, the applause, the acknowledgement that her creative vision had resonated. Yet that moment never came. Instead, she was confronted with omission, a list that might as well have been erased with her name. The emotional weight of being overlooked, especially in an arena she had worked tirelessly to penetrate, was crushing. Inside her private residence, her aides recall a storm of emotions. There was disbelief, that almost paralyzing question of, how could this happen? And there was the simmering anger, carefully contained but impossible to ignore. Sources say she paced the room, reviewing scripts, talking with confidants, and occasionally gesturing with a combination of frustration and disbelief. Every detail of the show, every carefully curated interview, every visual montage, every personal touch, suddenly felt undervalued. Yet Meghan's reaction was not just emotional, it was strategic. Those close to her report that within hours, she was considering her options, weighing each possible response with precision. Public statements could be risky, as could private confrontations with Netflix executives. She knew that any reaction would be scrutinized in real time, dissected by media outlets, social media users, and Hollywood insiders. But she was not one to be passive. Even in disappointment, Meghan's mind raced with calculated responses, each designed to assert control over the narrative while protecting her brand. Friends and advisors reportedly encouraged her to stay calm, emphasizing that one snub did not define her career or the show's success. Yet Meghan understood the stakes better than anyone. Awards season is more than a ceremony. It is a validation mechanism, a cultural barometer, and a career amplifier. A snub, especially a publicized one, could shape perception in ways that might limit opportunities, alter negotiations, and shift the trajectory of future projects. Meghan's private intensity reflected her awareness that this moment was far larger than a simple award. It was a test of influence, power, and perception. Inside her private space, she reportedly held a series of discussions with her closest advisors. "We cannot let this define the show," she allegedly said, her voice taut but firm. "But we also cannot ignore it. The world is watching, and our response will set the tone for everything that comes next." The statement reflected a dual awareness. She needed to manage both her personal feelings and the public narrative. In other words, Meghan was already strategizing how to turn a professional setback into a narrative that might work in her favor. Part of her frustration reportedly stemmed from the disconnect between audience reception and industry recognition. Early metrics suggested that viewers were highly engaged with Love, Meghan, sharing clips, commenting online, and praising specific episodes. Yet, this success on the ground was irrelevant to the Critics' Choice voters, whose evaluation criteria seemed opaque and disconnected from public sentiment. For Meghan, this gap was infuriating. She had built a bridge between celebrity appeal and meaningful content, only to have the bridge ignored by those who controlled institutional validation. Sources suggest that Meghan's team began compiling a detailed dossier of the show's successes, highlighting metrics, media coverage, and audience engagement. The intent was clear: prepare for discussions with Netflix executives, journalists, and, if necessary, awards committees. Meghan's private reaction was not mere venting. It was an orchestrated analysis of leverage, perception, and opportunity. Every number, every review, every viral moment became a data point to be used in asserting the show's value. Yet there was more than strategy at play. Friends described moments of raw emotion, quiet, private reflections in which Meghan allowed herself to feel the sting of rejection. Even a woman accustomed to global scrutiny was human, and the emotional impact of being overlooked for a project she had invested in personally and professionally was profound. These moments, while private, fueled her determination. The disappointment, rather than incapacitating her, became a motivator, a spark that would ignite a series of deliberate moves in the days that followed. The tension also extended to interpersonal dynamics. Meghan reportedly discussed the snub with select collaborators on the show, gauging their reactions and opinions. Some expressed sympathy, some frustration, and some skepticism. Each conversation was carefully navigated, as Meghan sought to balance emotional authenticity with strategic foresight. According to insiders, these discussions reinforced her understanding of Hollywood's inner workings. Recognition is often less about merit and more about perception, influence, and timing. And the realization fueled both her irritation and her resolve. But what truly heightened Meghan's private reaction was the knowledge that public perception could shift quickly. Social media chatter had already erupted, with supporters expressing outrage and critics framing the snub as inevitable. She reportedly recognized that her response would need to be measured yet impactful, demonstrating strength without inviting unnecessary controversy. The stakes were not just personal, they were professional, reputational, and, in some ways, existential. In addition to the emotional and strategic layers, Meghan's reaction reportedly included a focus on control. She considered carefully which parts of her experience to share publicly, how to shape the narrative for the audience, and how to leverage allies within Netflix and the entertainment industry. The goal was clear: transform a moment of omission into a catalyst for influence, publicity, and potential industry reconsideration. In other words, her private seething was not aimless anger. It was tactical preparation for the next move. Some sources suggest that Meghan also reflected on the irony of her situation. She had navigated global fame, intense media scrutiny, and the pressures of royal life. Yet here she was, still encountering the unpredictable dynamics of recognition. The realization reportedly added a layer of introspection. Even power, wealth, and influence cannot shield someone from the often arbitrary nature of accolades. And yet, she refused to let the situation define her worth or the value of her work. By the end of the first day, Meghan's private reaction had evolved from initial shock to a calculated mix of emotion, strategy, and determination. She understood that the snub, while painful, was not the end of the story. In fact, it was a pivot point, a moment that could be leveraged if handled with intelligence, precision, and timing. Sources indicate that she began mapping potential actions, from selective public commentary to private negotiations with Netflix executives, all while maintaining control over the emotional narrative. And yet, even as she focused on strategy, there remained a simmering personal edge. The feeling of being excluded, ignored, or undervalued lingered, creating an undercurrent of tension that shaped her decisions. This tension, insiders suggest, was both a motivator and a pressure point, driving Meghan to act with both caution and assertiveness in the days following the announcement. The chapter of Meghan's private reaction underscores a critical insight. The snub was never just about awards. It was about validation, perception, and the interplay between personal ambition and institutional recognition. Her response, intense, strategic, and deeply human, would set in motion a chain of events that no one outside her immediate circle could fully predict. And just as the world watched from afar, unaware of the intensity behind the closed doors, Meghan's next move was already in motion, an action that would surprise Netflix executives, shake industry insiders, and escalate the drama far beyond a simple awards omission. While Meghan Markle processed the Critics' Choice Awards snub behind closed doors, the world outside erupted into a frenzy that no PR team could fully control. Social media had become a battleground where perception, outrage, and humor collided, amplifying the stakes and thrusting Meghan's personal disappointment into a global spectacle. The situation evolved rapidly, turning what could have been a private setback into an international narrative of drama, intrigue, and controversy. It began with whispers that quickly escalated into posts, tweets, and viral commentary. Fans, industry watchers, and casual viewers alike shared their shock and disbelief at the omission of "With Love, Meghan" from the nominations. Memes flooded the internet, depicting exaggerated reactions of Meghan gasping, fainting, or dramatically clutching her pearls, imagery that mixed humor with a subtle critique of celebrity culture. But alongside the jokes, there was genuine discussion. Why had the show been overlooked? Was it merit, bias, politics, or something else entirely? Some posts framed the snub as a deliberate industry slight, suggesting that Hollywood insiders were resisting Meghan's entry into their creative circles. Others highlighted the show's popularity, arguing that audience engagement metrics should have been enough to secure at least a nomination. The contrasting narratives collided, creating a conversation that moved faster than any traditional media outlet could track. The snub became not just a story about awards, but a lens through which the public examined Hollywood's power dynamics, celebrity influence, and systemic biases. Industry insiders were watching closely. Netflix executives tracked hashtags, analyzed sentiment, and monitored viral trends. Every post, every retweet, and every comment became data points in a high-stakes calculation. The team faced an urgent question: how to respond without amplifying the controversy, while also protecting the show's reputation and Meghan's brand. Any misstep could escalate the story further, potentially drawing criticism toward the platform itself. The snub, in essence, had evolved into a social media wildfire, unpredictable, fast-moving, and impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the humor and satire on social media amplified the emotional stakes. Memes often juxtaposed Meghan's poised public persona with fictionalized over-the-top reactions to the snub, inviting both laughter and debate. While some viewers enjoyed the playful mockery, others expressed sympathy, defending her accomplishments and emphasizing the absurdity of dismissing her work based on celebrity status alone. The polarization reflected a broader tension. Social media, with its instantaneous feedback loops, had become both a tool and a trap for public figures navigating criticism. The controversy quickly attracted attention from journalists and entertainment commentators. Opinion pieces, talk shows, and online blogs dissected the snub in real time, often blending fact, speculation, and dramatic flair. Headlines ranged from sympathetic, "Meghan Markle overlooked despite critical acclaim," to snarky, "Critics' choice." The awards that said no to royalty. Every article contributed to a feedback loop, feeding the social media storm and increasing the pressure on both Meghan and Netflix to act. The role of fan communities cannot be understated. Loyal followers of Meghan's career mobilized across platforms, sharing clips from the show, tweeting support, and engaging in debates about fairness and representation. Their advocacy amplified the controversy, demonstrating the power of online communities to influence perception. For Meghan, the visible support may have been validating, yet it also raised the stakes. Every post became a potential narrative lever, every viral clip a statement about public opinion versus institutional recognition. Ironically, the rapid spread of social media commentary also revealed contradictions in perception. Some voices argued that the snub was evidence of systemic bias against women or former royals in Hollywood, while others framed it as a deserved critique of a show perceived as self-promotional. This juxtaposition created a tension in the public discourse. Could Meghan ever escape the lens of her celebrity identity, or was she forever tethered to public expectations and judgment? The intensity of the online debate underscored the challenge of managing both perception and narrative in an era dominated by digital platforms. In response, Netflix initiated a measured monitoring approach. Social media teams were tasked with tracking sentiment, analyzing emerging trends, and reporting potential flashpoints to executives. The challenge was clear: manage the story without letting it spiral out of control. Every viral meme, every hashtag, and every trending topic had the potential to shape mainstream media coverage, creating a cascading effect that could be either beneficial or damaging. At the same time, the social media storm influenced public engagement with Love, Meghan. Streams and viewership reportedly surged as curiosity drew new audiences to the show, eager to judge for themselves what had been overlooked. Paradoxically, the snub and the accompanying online frenzy may have increased exposure and engagement in ways that traditional awards recognition could not. The digital reaction turned the omission into a talking point, driving both attention and debate. Yet for Meghan, the storm presented a double-edged sword. While public support and viral engagement were encouraging, the intensity and unpredictability of social media also created risks. Misinterpretations, mischaracterizations, and amplified critiques could spiral into long-term reputational challenges. Her private team reportedly worked tirelessly to manage messaging, ensuring that any engagement with online commentary reflected a carefully curated narrative. The balance between authenticity, emotional expression, and strategic control became critical. The social media narrative also influenced Hollywood perception. Executives, producers, and critics were monitoring online sentiment closely, aware that public opinion could affect future nominations, collaborations, and negotiations. In essence, the social media reaction became a parallel arena of influence, challenging traditional gatekeepers and introducing a new form of cultural pressure. Meghan's visibility and engagement metrics were now part of a broader equation, a real-time barometer of public support versus institutional recognition. This digital feedback loop also highlighted the emotional intensity of the situation. Public discussion, online debates, and viral memes reinforced the personal impact of the snub on Meghan, even as she navigated private strategy sessions. The interplay of personal disappointment, public perception, and social media dynamics created a complex psychological landscape. For someone accustomed to managing scrutiny, this new dimension added both pressure and leverage, requiring careful navigation. As the storm escalated, whispers emerged about possible interventions. Should Netflix issue a statement emphasizing audience engagement and critical praise? Should Meghan herself address the snub directly, potentially leveraging public sentiment in her favor? Each option carried risk, as well as potential reward. The online debate had transformed the issue from a simple awards omission into a complex, multi-layered narrative with implications for branding, influence, and professional trajectory. The social media frenzy also underscored a fundamental tension. Celebrity-driven projects operate in a space where public perception and institutional validation often conflict. Meghan's show had achieved attention, engagement, and cultural resonance. Yet this success was not enough to secure critical recognition. Social media amplified this tension, making it impossible for either Meghan or Netflix to ignore the broader conversation. And yet, amidst the chaos, a critical realization emerged. The controversy itself could be leveraged strategically. Every viral clip, every supportive post, and every media article represented an opportunity to shape narrative, influence perception, and assert value. The challenge would be execution, navigating a storm that had no clear boundaries and no predictable trajectory. The intensity of the social media storm marked a turning point. What began as a private disappointment became a public drama, magnified by digital platforms, opinion leaders, and viral content. The omission of "With Love, Meghan" was no longer a moment of personal frustration. It was a cultural event, a conversation about celebrity, recognition, and influence that reverberated across Hollywood and the public consciousness. But the most critical moment, the moment when Meghan decided how to respond publicly, was still ahead. Her next move, calculated and deliberate, would not only determine the future of the show, but also send shockwaves through the industry and the media landscape. As the social media storm raged, traditional media outlets could no longer remain passive observers. Headlines, opinion pieces, and late-night commentary began dominating the news cycle, amplifying the Critics' Choice snub and transforming it into a global talking point. For Meghan Markle, what began as a personal disappointment now morphed into a public spectacle, with the media framing her omission as a cultural event, a Hollywood controversy, and, in some cases, a personal vendetta. The day after the nominations were announced, entertainment news programs dedicated entire segments to the snub. Hosts debated the reasons behind it, offering their own analysis while dissecting the show's strengths and weaknesses. Some praised Meghan's vision and storytelling, highlighting the emotional resonance of the series. Others, however, questioned whether the show merited awards recognition, framing it as a celebrity-driven project that lacked substance. These debates, often punctuated with dramatic visuals and clips from the show, fueled the perception that the controversy had become as much about Meghan herself as about "With Love, Meghan." Print and online media joined the fray. Major outlets published detailed analyses, often blending fact, speculation, and insider commentary. Articles explored the possible reasons behind the snub, industry politics, bias against former royals, skepticism toward celebrity-led projects, and even internal disagreements among award voters. Each piece added layers to the narrative, creating a complex tapestry of perspectives that ranged from supportive to critical, sympathetic to skeptical. The coverage was relentless, ensuring that the snub remained in public consciousness long after the initial announcement. The media frenzy was further amplified by expert commentary. Critics, journalists, and Hollywood insiders weighed in, offering their opinions on the significance of the omission. Some argued that awards recognition is often a reflection of influence, connections, and timing rather than merit alone. Others suggested that Meghan's unique position, simultaneously a global celebrity, former royal, and creative professional, complicated how her work was perceived. These analyses created a nuanced, yet often contradictory, picture, highlighting the tension between public engagement and institutional validation. Television and radio also contributed to the amplification. Talk shows dissected every angle of the controversy, interviewing cultural commentators, entertainment journalists, and industry insiders. Some segments leaned toward humor, mocking the situation with exaggerated dramatizations. Others emphasized fairness, arguing that a project with meaningful content deserved recognition regardless of its celebrity attachment. The coverage created a feedback loop where public discussion informed media narratives, which in turn influenced further public commentary. Meanwhile, Meghan's team monitored the media coverage closely. Every article, broadcast segment, and opinion piece was analyzed for tone, content, and potential impact.